During this year's Steam Summer Sale, I found an interesting looking game, that being Tell Some Story Foz. The title's a bit unwieldy, but the trailer got my attention. It looked like a neo-noir cyberpunk third-person shooter, where you explore the seedy underbelly of the city and get into gunfights along the way. And that's what I got, but not entirely how I expected it to be. Foz was released this year by Camelot TDM, which is probably a single-person developer plus an executive producer. You play as Detective Pacek Foz, a disgraced cop with a tragic past. Just before reconnecting with his brother after 3 years without contact, Foz gets a call from police telling him that his brother was murdered. Inspecting his brother's apartment leads to a shootout, and Foz gets framed for murder. Now a fugitive, Foz teams up with some other loose cannon cops and every sleazeball in H City to uncover the truth and find the ones responsible for his brother's death. That's as simple as I can make the plot. Pretty standard action movie stuff, but Foz's charm isn't so much the story itself, but how it tells a story. I can't say that the game's art style is unique. Imagine playing Deus Ex, but the Quake 2 models all look like Superbrothers sprites. Despite this, the game manages to inject a ton of personality into its characters. Same goes with the environment art. It's all simple models and flat textures, but the rim shading and minimalist details create this aesthetic I can only describe as impressionistic neo-noir. Take a flat plane, put some horizontal lines on it to indicate text, and now we have a document. Now take several instances of that document and have them move around the levels to represent papers rustling in the wind. Instant atmosphere. The writing and dialogue are where the game's vision starts to waver. This is a Russian game, and if you're wondering how I can say that for sure that it's Russian, here's the main menu screen with only 2 possible language options. Thing is, I can't tell from the writing how fluent the dev is when it comes to translating in English, and I don't know how much of that is intentional. Most of the time, the dialogue feels like it was run through an AI to translate the original Russian to English, so we get lines that feel awkward or just don't make sense. But that's offset by moments where the English translation is crystal clear with conveying the exact tone and mood of a specific sentence. And some of those bars go hard.
Было больно
Что именно?
умирать.
Не помню. У меня тоже последнее время проблемы с головой.
Есть такое. Ну ладно, меня там ждут. Пора заканчивать этот фарс. Еще увидимся.
Только не торопись сюда. Договорились?
Кому суждено сгореть, не утонет. Успокойся, брат.
Along with that, despite not being able to parse every single sentence perfectly, I still got the overall message from each exchange. If you've ever played Final Fantasy X and talked to an Al-Bhed character while only having 3 or 4 Al-Bhed dictionary volumes in your possession, it's kinda like that. The game's plot is broken into several chapters, which the game refers to as segments. There are 12 segments total, and each segment is broken up into several checkpoints that you can revisit at any point once you've cleared that checkpoint. At the start, you'll only have a handful of checkpoints, but the tail end of the game practically doubles the number of checkpoints that the early game segments provided. In Foz, you're only ever doing 2 things. 1. Exploring the current space and interacting with all the characters to glean info on what to do next, or 2. Getting into gunfights with hostile parties. The level design for each area is impressive because they trick you into thinking that they're smaller than they actually are. But around every corner is a narrow hallway that leads to another room, another dingy nightclub where they play loud music and dance with the strobing lights. I don't think I've seen another game with this many nightclubs. When you're done exploring, you hop into your car and progress the story. The camera cuts to this intimate angle where you're looking from the rear seat and the car won't move until you press W or S. There are moments where you'll be driving the car on an infinitely scrolling stretch of land, and you can change the camera's position by pressing 1, 2, or 3 on the keyboard. 1 pulls the camera out of the car, so you can see a cinematic shot of the highway. 2 resets the camera back to the default Children of Men angle. 3 pushes the camera in to focus on the center console of the car. This is where you can make phone calls and listen to voicemails to get more out of the story. When you're done with these moments, you end the ride by selecting the destination when it appears on screen. Reminds me of the car sections in Sam & Max. Sometimes, you'll run into trouble and need to let your guns do the talking. You start off with your service pistol, but get stronger weapons as the story progresses. Guns are mapped from 1 to 4 on the keyboard, with pistols on 1, PDWs on 2, automatic weapons on 3, and shotguns on 4. But don't ever use shotguns, they're bad in this game.
Ничего себе, у вас тут особо интересно. Адрес это все отлетел. Продолжим.
If you've played a third-person shooter, then you can play FOS. Mouse 1 to fire the gun, and mouse 2 to aim down sights. When you get sniper rifles, you can use a scope by pressing mouse 3 after aiming down sights. Pressing mouse 3 on any other kind of gun will only cause FOS to lean further into his sights, but that doesn't really help you in a fight. If your gun has any attachments, you can toggle them by pressing Z or X. Early on, the game teaches you about FOS's concentration to slow down time and line up your shots. Based on the trailer and some in-game posters from earlier in the story, I can understand if you expect this game to be inspired by Max Payne, like El Paso Elsewhere. But no, this game ain't that kind of shooter. The concentration meter is very small and runs out fast. It's meant to help you fish for shots that are hard to line up, but you can't rely on it to survive a shootout. This is a cover shooter, and you need to move FOS close to doorways or behind chest-high obstacles to magnetically stick to those surfaces. You can pop out of cover and fire back with mouse 1. Despite what my taste suggests, I don't outright hate cover shooters. If they can make the combat interesting, then there's nothing wrong with stopping and popping. I don't want to say that FOS's combat is outright bad, it's just frustrating. If you don't land headshots, then you have to turn an enemy into Swiss cheese to put them down. But enemies are deadly accurate, and spending any time out of cover is practically asking the game to reset you to the last checkpoint. Most encounters come from medium to long range, so guns with high firing rates and decent accuracy become the most important weapons in your arsenal. This is why shotguns aren't that useful. They have to be in close range and take a while to reload. Something nice about the gunplay is that you never have to hunt down ammo. The game addresses this plot contrivance by giving FOS a duffel bag for every shootout. That's so clever, and I wish other games had thought of that. But there are some issues with the combat that hold the game back. The one I find most egregious and unnecessary is barrel collision. When FOS approaches a surface and he's not in cover, he'll press his gun up against the surface instead of keeping it trained forward. This gets bad when you're trying to position yourself to shoot into the edge of a doorway, but you're too close, so your gun is useless, while enemies pile out of the doorway to shoot you. Also, sometimes FOS staggers after getting hit, and this can cause him to step out of cover and into enemy fire. Another issue that could have easily been addressed is that there's no way to swap shoulders when aiming down sights. This is important because it makes shooting from the right side of doorways much harder, as they have to rely on the soft cover magnetism, and then have FOS turn on a hinge and stick his body out of cover as he fires his gun. On their own, these issues don't affect the overall experience of the game. But, the game introduces tougher enemies near the tail end of the story, and their presence compounds these issues. Sometimes, the enemy's bullets can shoot through cover and hit you even if you're hiding. Ironically, this is probably the first and only cover shooter where blind fire is more viable than aiming down sights. Occasionally, you'll have fights where the enemy throws smoke grenades to occlude your vision. These are actually terrifying moments because you can't see through the smoke, but the enemy still have perfect aim and can dome you without a second thought. So how about having to fight an enemy that keeps coming back to life and chasing after you with its swords, that you have to drop so it doesn't kill you in a few swipes, in a closed-off arena that has smoke getting constantly pumped in to occlude your vision? I thought I was doing something wrong because I kept dying, but it turned out I didn't kill him enough times for the game to consider that enough. The latter half of the story throws you a bone by giving you NPC buddies who will help you out in shootouts. These guys are handy because they have regenerating health and can draw aggro away from you while you clean up. But if your buddies go down, then you'll fail the story and have to reset to the last checkpoint. So how about having to fight a guy wielding a minigun who almost always kills one of your buddies? I thought I failed the story, but never got the notice, so I beat the boss, and then the game acted like one of our buddies never went down. It doesn't happen that often, but when the game sends out these mixed signals, it doesn't feel like it was done with any authorial intent. But then there are these moments where I think the game is going to go downhill, and ends up not being that bad, like the bare knuckle fight at the end of the game. I can't believe this fight is less stressful than this fight.
Если ты думаешь, что молчание — это выход из сложившейся ситуации, я тебя расстрою.
Делай то, что должен легавый. Я ничего тебе не скажу.
Я тебя услышал.
Хватит с него. Нам пора идти, босс.
Что Липско? Почему она голубая?
Какая разница? Ему она явно не помогла.
Despite my issues with the gunplay, it's not enough to sour my experience over the game, because combat isn't the main focus until the very end. It's more about exploring the spaces and soaking in the atmosphere. The soundtrack fits with the game's grim, melancholic tone. I pissed a friend off when I streamed it because I said it sounded like Health from Max Payne 3. There are NPCs you can talk to that provide cryptic yet profound advice, and they're the main source of the game's achievements. And I haven't brought it up yet, but this dev is not shy about showing off his influences. You'll see them plastered all over the walls and signs. I went to this one bar and saw the barkeep's name, and I thought it looked awfully familiar, then shook my head about it until I saw this achievement pop up. Besides the overwhelming nihilism that pervades over the atmosphere, this is the most Russian thing about the game. This isn't to say that the game is wholly unoriginal. There's this recurring visual motif of the screen tearing whenever you come across something that reminds you about your brother's death or what happened to your wife. Sometimes you get jump cuts where the screen flips itself upside down, mixed in with the tearing effect. Sometimes you'll hallucinate and see things that aren't actually there. It's a really cool way of showing Foz's psychotic episodes. There's not much else to say about Tell Some Story Foz, other than what happens at the end. If you're still interested in seeing how the story plays out for yourself, skip to the final thoughts section of this video in the timeline. The last segment takes place in the Megacorp's HQ, much like how Max Payne ends at the Acer Corporation's building. You'll fight through a small army of private security and find the scientist who was torturing your friends from previous segments. He gives you a key card to the boss's office and tells you that it's on the 69th, come on man, the 69th floor.
Я же вернусь за тобой. Ну да, тоже вариант.
Oh yeah, the final boss is supposed to look like M. Bison from Street Fighter, because all of the ads that feature him use touched up versions of his Street Fighter 4 and 5 models for his likeness. You have a chat with him where he tries to do the don't you feel bad player thing, but since this is a Russian game, it doesn't work on us. He also gives you a choice to work for him. I never picked this option.
Некоторые говорят, что дождь — это слезы ангелов, которые оплакивают невинные души, спасая их. Другие считают, так природа пытается очиститься, смыть с себя грязь, которая считает нас людей. А зная, что думал я, это просто вода. Невинных душ уже нет, нас не спасти.
Now the cops are giving us a choice to surrender and face justice. This is the bad ending. The game ends with Foz locked up in maximum security, being asked what his prisoner ID is over and over again, while you look at how each of his friends are either convicted or on the run from the law. Despite what we're being told, there is another option. Of course the Russian game would make this the good ending. The game ends with Foz walking down a dark tunnel. Do you get it? While we learn that his friends take over H City and turn it into something better, and you become a martyr who saved everyone from Shadaloo's evil influence. And that's Foz's story told. So, do I recommend this game? I haven't done this in a while. I hope I'm not rusty. Like most Eastern European titles that aren't Stalker or anything from CD Projekt, this is one of those games where you're either gonna get it or not. And I don't mean whether you pick up on any of the references that the game is making on its posters. It all depends on your tolerance for Slavjank. Are you willing to parse through broken English to pick up on what the plot and themes are going for? Can you handle having to deal with armies of aimbots while wrestling with rudimentary cover shooter mechanics? Does having a bit of ambiguity bother you, or do you enjoy that feeling that you're not getting the whole picture? If you answer yes to all of those, then yeah, Tell Some Story Foz is worth playing. The best way I can describe my feeling for most of this game is that look that Josh Brolin has in Hail Caesar when he's looking at the dailies for a movie. See that look? He is charmed and amused at the spectacle. That was me whenever I looked at a poster and could immediately identify what movie it referenced. or when I saw holograms doing that one Thanos dance. I won't lie and say that the combat didn't get under my skin, because it felt like some encounters were too bullshit, but I beat this game, and I couldn't get through Millennia, so take that for what it's worth. Something I liked about this game's credits is that the dev puts his dedication at the end, thanking everyone who supported him, and that keeps me from being absolutely flippant over the game. This isn't Devil's Hunt or Infernal. I can feel the creator's fingerprints all over the story. You can say whatever you want about Tell Some Story Foz, but you can't say that it doesn't have any personality.